And Matthew Vadum was one of the guests, and the topic was the resurgence of ACORN and how they're still managing to pilfer money from the taxpayers. And it's one of those things that we thought this was over and done with. The voter fraud thing was addressed, and the people were indicted, they were prosecuted, and nothing to see here, let's move on. But apparently, this is a movement that's not going away. Joining us on the program right now is the author of Subversion, How Obama's ACORN red shirts are still terrorizing and ripping off American taxpayers. Hello, sir.
Hey, how are you today? Good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you. A lot of people think this was something that was put to bed, and it's not.
Absolutely not. ACORN is basically a zombie group. Whether it's dead, it depends on who you talk to. The main organization is in Chapter 7 bankruptcy. ACORN, it's called, the National ACORN Group. But the state chapters have broken off and incorporated themselves separately under new names. So it's a covert version of ACORN. And in the various states, they've adopted new names, like in New York, they're New York Communities for Change. Massachusetts, they're New England United for Justice. California, Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. In Minnesota Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, and it just goes on and on and on in about 14 states.
How much power? I mean, because I've described it like this. I've described it like this to people who, not because they're stupid, they're just too busy to wrap their heads around this.
It's very complicated to follow, I can tell you that.
I tried to explain this to someone by saying, okay, here's how it works. You pay your taxes, the money goes into the IRS, the House of Representatives, all bills for raising revenue start in the House of Representatives, but we know that, senators and congressmen all get their hands and they get their little pet projects. They turn around and give money to these groups that line up to get grants or subsidy program money or whatever it is. They quote unquote hire employees. Then those people take the money that they get for their quote unquote labor and turn around and recontribute it back into the campaigns of the senators and congressmen that allocate the money as the appropriators.
Right. It's sort of like America is funding its own destruction. We're subsidizing it by giving money to big government groups that lobby for more big government. So, it's a very self-destructive thing.
You mention Alinsky in the book, and I keep a copy of Rules for Radicals on my radio board here every day. I keep it on my radio board with little Post-it notes that are all doggy-eared to very specific chapters in Rules for Radicals. Do you think that if anyone outside of your book, if they read Rules for Radicals as a component of your book, would most people be frightened?
I would think, yes, I think they would be. Saul Alinsky was a man who loved violence, and today
these are peace loving. Socialism is peaceful.
These are violent mobs. If I'd known Ann Coulter was writing a book about violent mobs, perhaps we could have collaborated. So, but anyway, I call it Marxist mobocracy, and they use violent means. They use threats and intimidation and physical coercion to get their way. So they'll storm a bank, for example, and have a sit-in there. That's one of the not-so-bad things they do compared to the others. Other times, they will, like they did with Liberty Tax Service in Virginia Beach, Virginia, they brought in a busload of people activists who harassed and physically attacked employees at Liberty Tax Service, assaulting them and spitting on them. And this was all documented by Fox in a documentary that aired in late 2009 with Megyn Kelly. And they will surround a bank CEO's home and bang on the windows and frighten the children and destroy the property and dump garbage on the guy's lawn or in his driveway in order to pressure a corporation to either change its policies to suit them or to give ACORN a donation, which they used to call protection money.
It's funny. You and I were on a show called Follow the Money. You have a chapter called Follow the Money. And, I mean, I'm looking at this table of federal grants here. My God. I mean, when we complain about $3.6 million to study menstruating monkeys smoking pot, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what ACORN gets from the federal government.
Well, ACORN has gotten, previously the figure had been, that was reported, Kevin Mooney, a reporter who at the time worked for the Washington Examiner, did a really extensive search, and he found $53 million over the years that had gone to ACORN and its various affiliated organizations. But I dug even deeper, and I found that really the total is at least $79 million in federal funds. So ACORN has been feeding at the public trough for a really long time, and they get oftentimes it's not even clear that if you do the research, it's very difficult. For example, one arm of ACORN is called American Institute for Social Justice. That doesn't sound like ACORN. It's got a hope and changey kind of feel to it.
Oh, yeah.
It's not immediately obvious that is ACORN. It was like a training institute that trained community organizers, and they did some research and other things. But the American Institute for Social Justice would get money, and then it would write checks for millions of dollars to other affiliates in the ACORN empire of activism. So once they start doing things like that, it's impossible to know if tax dollars are being commingled with ACORN's own private funds. So you can just see how this sort of Enron-style accounting can lead to great abuses, and it has within ACORN.
I'm looking at the shakedown list here. When I've done my reading on Maldif and Micha and some of these organizations with major companies like Coca-Cola and Ford and Anheuser-Busch. And pretty much when Maldif goes to Anheuser-Busch, probably the couple grand they give them, a couple $100,000, probably more like it, is just, hey, take this money, go away, don't call us anti-Latino. You have Orkin exterminating here. Orkin, like the Orkin man? Like, I'm sorry, I'm not making fun of you for putting it in there. I'm just saying that's a company that you don't really think of as being one of these, when you think of these multinational, Coca-Cola, Anheuser-Busch, Orkin? The Orkin man is giving money.
Companies are terrified by Saul Alinsky-inspired community organizer groups. They don't want the bad publicity. They don't want to be picketed. They don't want them showing up on their doorstep, as I said, scaring their families or assaulting their employees. So they pay this kind of, this blackmail money, this protection money to make these people go away. So yeah, Orkin did it. The National Trade and Coatings Association, that's the paint lobby, paid money for ACORN to go away. And the list, as you can see, just goes on and on.
Now, what happened after Sherwin-Williams refused to give them money?
Sherwin-Williams refused to give them money, and then what happened eventually is that they filed a class action lawsuit in Rhode Island and ended up getting a $1 billion judgment. So
against Sherwin-Williams.
Sherwin-Williams, that's right.
Like the paint people.
The paint people.
This is, I'm only asking this because these don't seem like big targets. Walmart's a big target. McDonald's is a big target.
$1 billion is a big chunk of change.
Yeah, I know, but most people, when they think of...
They wanted $38 billion. They wanted $38 billion, Andrew.
When did these...
They didn't get 38, but that's what they asked for.
But when you think of companies that comprise big targets, Walmart is always in the crosshairs of the labor movement. The auto industry is always in the crosshairs of the environmental movement.
They've gone after Walmart.
But when I know, I'm just saying that when you think of a company that's a target, there's usually an obvious reason, like, all right, PETA's going after McDonald's because they serve ground beef. What did Sherwin-Williams ever do to ACORN?
They're just nothing in particular. They just look for shakedown victims.
Now
That's all they do. It's all about the money. Jesse Jackson was once quoted at a conference a few years ago, and he in turn quoted Jesse James. He said, "Why did Jesse James rob banks? because that's where the money was.
I want to read to you read a quote from your book about the schools. It says, ACORN also runs taxpayer-supported schools and indoctrinates the students who attend them. In New York City, it runs the ACORN High School for Social Justice in Brooklyn, the ACORN Community High School in Brooklyn, the Bread and Roses High School in Harlem. It has the ACORN-branded schools in Oakland, California. And you go on to describe these schools. Now, I broadcasted in New York City. I didn't know these schools were here, but you can see. I was in Philadelphia for a little while. My father was at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which is in North Philadelphia, and the area surrounding where they have that hospital is just, I mean, it is just awful. But you drive down these streets with the old row houses and the old row house neighborhoods, and every couple of blocks there's some community center with a huge mural. And it might be a Black Panther, big face with like a bunch of little children surrounding him, or a Che Guevara, and you see these communities. And is this where these organizations are? Is that where they are?
Well, that's one of those types of centers, ACORN and other community organizing groups, because there are so many others. It's hard to keep track of them. They use things like that to recruit, absolutely. But
these are real schools here in New York City and in California.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. They might be in the process of disaffiliating with ACORN now that ACORN has filed for ACORN, the national organization headquartered in Brooklyn, has filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. But last time I checked, they were part of ACORN.
Matthew Vadum is joining us. He's the author of Subversion Inc. Wade Rathke, Barack Obama. Is there a connection?
Well, Wade Rathke, Wade Rathke claims to have never met President Obama. And
a lot of people claim to have never met President Obama.
Right. Yeah. In fact, the more notorious the people are, the more they try to not let their infamy rub off on President Obama. It's true. I find that hard to believe, but it doesn't really matter. He's very plugged in. Wade Rathke is very plugged in with the radical left wing of the Democratic Party, and Bertha Lewis, his successor as the chief organizer of ACORN, succeeded him in summer of 2008. Openly bragged to the New York Times that about her connections to the Obama administration, especially once a fellow named Patrick Gaspard started working for Obama as his political director. Political director is the same title Karl Rove held. Now, everybody thinks that David Axelrod has been that because he's so visible with his big bushy mustache on TV all the time. But really, the power behind the throne was Patrick Gaspard. And now Patrick Gaspard, and this ought to terrify anybody who's concerned about America's democratic processes, about the integrity of Americans' electoral system, that Patrick Gaspard was transferred from the White House by Obama, and he now heads the executive director. He is now the executive director of the Democratic National Committee. The public face of that is the very obnoxious Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, who you hear accusing Republicans of being rapists and racists every day. But the guy who runs the day-to-day affairs of the DNC is Patrick Gaspard, and he has very close ties to ACORN, and he used to be an executive vice president at ACORN's union, SEIU. ACORN and SEIU are virtually indistinguishable in many states. And, he's running the DNC. He's in charge of the campaign war machine for the Democrats. And I think that ought to frighten anybody who loves this country.
How would if the next president is not Obama, if a Republican president is, let's say that the job numbers stay where they are, the economy doesn't turn around, China is calling on us to address our debt and our deficit.
Isn't it amazing that the Chinese communists more fiscally responsible than the President of the United States?
How would somebody, because obviously they were there during Bush, is this something that a Republican president just probably didn't pay attention to? There was so many other things on the radar, like 2 wars. I mean, what would it take if this were a computer, how would we get rid of this virus?
Republicans traditionally have been terrified of going after ACORN because ACORN always plays the racism card. If you accuse ACORN of any wrongdoings,
so you're saying vote for Herman Cain. Wait, so you're saying vote for Herman Cain then?
What?
You're saying vote for Herman Cain then?
Right, absolutely. Yes, you got it. But you know, anytime you point out ACORN's problems, it's corruption, it's criminal inclinations, you get labeled a racist. Even when the ACORN bragged about registering more than 1 million new voters in 2008, 400,000 of them were thrown out. This was in the New York Times as well.
How many people were prosecuted? This was in Kansas City. This was in Las Vegas. This was systemic. Some
are still going. Some prosecutions are still in progress. By the time that we had to put the book to bed in, I guess it was January, we had I had counted up 54 criminal voter fraud or related offense convictions for ACORN-associated individuals, ACORN employees, you know, a girlfriend of an ACORN employee who conspired with ACORN, you know, things like that. 54. In addition, ACORN itself was convicted of felony voter fraud in Nevada just a few weeks ago and is awaiting sentencing. This is the first time that ACORN itself has actually been convicted of a crime. You would think that would be an opportunity for a racketeering prosecution, don't you think?
Yeah.
With all these convictions across, you know, in various states across the country showing a habitual pattern of conduct and attack on the integrity of the electoral system.
I want to one more thing before we, because we're kind of running out of time here. The chapter Maximum Eligible Participation, ACORN's Welfare Strategy. We've talked about Cloward Piven on this program. It's you know, it's something that a lot of this stuff, you, me, hardcore listeners to programs like mine, we know what this stuff is. When we can prattle it off, and I could talk about the 10 pillars of communism, right. I can tell you. Do you think people need to know more about ACORN and this Cloward? Let me read a quote from the book. Cloward and Piven urged that the welfare state apparatus be used to destroy the American system. They urged that welfare recipients who are naturally inclined to support political candidates promising to steal the wealth of productive members of society and redistribute it to the poor be registered to vote in the same welfare offices where they leech off society. In other words, put them on the voter rolls while they stand in the food stamp lines or pick up welfare checks. The precise moment in which they are most resentful towards society, many of them blame for their failures in life. And then you go on to talk about people that have been involved with this strategy and Obama. Can you just, I mean, just real quick, a lot of people need to know more about this Cloward Piven strategy.
Right. The strategy involves a number of different approaches, but it basically involves riling up the poor so that they riot and force change in society, and that's basically what it's all about.
Fundamental transformation.
Hope and change.
Fundamental transformation.
You got it. Fundamental transformation, or as Obama says, hope and change. This is what they're all about. Cloward and Piven founded the group. ACORN has a parent organization from the '60s, National Welfare Rights Organization, that they co-founded with Saul Alinsky. Okay, and that's what gave birth to ACORN in 1970. And then Cloward and Piven remained intimately involved in ACORN affairs for the rest of their lives. Piven is still alive. Piven right now Francis Fox Piven is on the board of directors of Project Vote, which is the vote fraud division of ACORN, the one that Obama worked for in Chicago in 1992.
Well, I can have you in studio. We could do this for hours.
I'm happy to do it.
We'll have to get you back on real soon. I don't want to end it right here. One last thing. We look at, you know, when we follow this, we could start with Karl Marx. We can go to, you know, Saul Alinsky. It seems that every couple of generations, somebody inherits these movements, gives them new names and breathes new life into them, makes them hip for the time. Who are the people? Who is maybe the point person other than Obama? Who is the Wade Rathke of today? Who is it now? Who's inheriting it right now?
Well, as ACORN was collapsing, the national organization, but there was a power struggle, and Bertha Lewis and her people ultimately won out.
Yeah, but she's like old. I mean, who's coming up in it now?
Who's coming up in ACORN now?
I mean, no, in this movement, in this no. I mean, in this far left, bring it all down, Cloward Piven, collapse this.
Not just ACORN. You're talking.
Yeah,
about.
I'm talking about the movement.
There are significant organizations like George Gale is the head of National People's Action, which is another scary organization that closely resembles ACORN, and they were holding all those rallies against Wall Street last year, mass marches intended to intimidate the banks and force changes. So there's National People's Action. There's a group called Jobs with Justice that's associated with the labor movement.
That's so cute. That sounds so cute.
Yeah, Jobs with Justice. Isn't that sweet?
All right, the book is Subversion Incorporated, How Obama's ACORN Red Shirts Are Still Terrorizing and Ripping Off American Taxpayers. Matthew Vadum, thanks for giving us your time. We're going to have you in studio.
Thank you. There's a website, SUBVERSIONINC.com. It redirects to the Facebook page for the book, SUBVERSIONINC.com.
All right, thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much.
All right, 1-866-95. That is some interesting stuff. And I was inspired to have him on the program because we were on together on Eric Bolling's Follow the Money. This is scary stuff. These people, when they talk about bringing it all down, they don't mean, leave Elm Street and the 3-bedroom, 2-bath house people alone. They mean bringing it down. They mean bringing it all down. They're not playing games with you. It's not like, you're okay. You have a nice little house in the burbs. We're going to leave you alone. You're the people they hate the most in the burbs. We're right, they're wrong. That's the end of the story. The arguments cannot be broken. Sirius XM Patriot.